Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about normalcy bias. This can be a logical fallacy, but it isn't necessarily. Normalcy bias basically is a psychological concept in which a person starts from the implicit, sometimes explicit assumption that the way things are is the way that things will continue to be. This can be rooted in an appeal to tradition, which is, in fact, a logical fallacy. So it can be built out of this sort of sense of things have always been done this way, whether or not that's historically true. Things have always been done this way, therefore they need to continue being done this way. But it isn't necessarily limited to that. Normalcy bias really comes into play when you're talking about claims of policy, about what should or should not be done in a particular situation. And it can work a couple of different directions, right? So you start from the assumption that the way things are is just the way things are going to continue to be. One sort of upshot of that is that it can become paralytic, right? It can lead you to reject potential change. This is related to doomerism, right? This idea that nothing is ever going to get better, and so we should just give up and accept the terrible condition of the universe, society, humanity, whatever it is. And there is again a paralytic component to that, right? If there is a bad situation that exists, but it's unchangeable, then there's no good reason to try to change it, right? So this is one element of normalcy bias, right? Is that it can prohibit or prevent action from occurring. We can't change it, so we shouldn't try. And sometimes that's true. Right? There are situations that cannot be changed based on policy decisions, human action, etc., whatever it is. Okay, cool. But usually that's not the case with a lot of the situations where it is a policy issue, right? Like, gravity continues to exist. The laws of physics continue to exist. That's not something that's a policy issue. That's an issue of fact. Is it true or is it not true? But when it's a question of policy, even big policy, right? Do we need to continue having a society in the U.S., though other places as well, to greater or lesser extents, with massive economic inequality? It's not going to be easy to change that if we decide we want to change that, but it is changeable. But if we start from the mentality that there is currently massive economic inequality, so it must be that way. This is normal. This is the way that things are. And again, there's that paralytic doomerism. We can't change it. It is the way it is. And so we have no incentive to try to make things better. On the other hand, you have a strand of normalcy bias that says we can make any changes that we want, and it doesn't, and not that it doesn't matter, that's the wrong way of thinking about it, but we can make any changes that we want without losing these things that currently exist. And this can lead to incredibly bad policy decisions, right? So if you assume that something that currently exists is good, or if you believe that something that currently exists is good, and it exists because of the way that the system is currently set up, if you adopt a policy that radically changes the current system, then it likely impacts the thing that you think is good. Texas is actually, I think, a really good example of this in the U.S. This is a place where, especially for libertarians, and I put libertarians in scare quotes because for viewers in other parts of the world, libertarians means something different than it tends to mean in the US. In the US, libertarians tend to be people who want to be able to do drugs, want to be able to not pay taxes, but basically want almost everything else that right-wing or far right-wing people want. So there's substantially less of the actual personal liberty, personal freedom, than there is in libertarian philosophy in other parts of the world. But U.S. libertarians, the U.S. far right, who theoretically want lower taxes, although Trump's imposition of tariffs, which are basically taxes on U.S. consumers, undermines that, but we'll set that aside for the moment. This idea that we can cut taxes without substantially sacrificing the quality of society, right? We could cut taxes in the U.S. One of the easiest ways to do that would be to substantially reduce the military budget. The military budget is massive. We spend tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of money on the military, much of which is objectively wasted according to the few audits that the Pentagon has ever allowed to be done of the military budgeting. But that there's no intention of doing that, right? So this is part of the thing, is there's a normalcy bias element to these arguments often. It is based in a belief that we can cut taxes, but we don't necessarily then have to cut things like military spending or defense spending. We don't have to cut police budgets, which make up the largest single line item of most municipal budgets in the U.S. We don't have to cut things like public roads. We don't have to cut fire department budgets, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things that we have that help to make our society function, we don't have to do away with them. Roads will just continue to be maintained. Fire departments and police will continue to, to serve. To these, police don't really serve. That's largely an ideological obscurantism. But you get what I'm saying, right? This idea that we don't have to give things up, even if we make changes to the foundational structures that allow those things to exist. And so there's this sort of fantastical approach, this fantastical mentality in which people functioning under the guise of normalcy bias will propose policy changes that would then prevent or that would then force a fundamental reworking of structures within their society or within a business, within an organization, a university, whatever it is, right? Whatever sort of sphere you're talking about. If you start from the assumption that this is the way that things are, they will continue to be this way, even if we change things that would necessitate a reconfiguration of the things that currently are, then your policy-making decision becomes divorced from practical reality, right? It's no longer a question of what will actually happen, what will be the actual outcome of these policy decisions. It becomes an issue of, what do I want? And you start to behave as though what you want dictates what will or can occur, rather than the necessities of practical reality. And so in this way, normalcy bias becomes Normalcy bias has these two very contrasting results, one of which is paralysis. We cannot solve this problem. This problem is simply inevitable, therefore there is no policy decision to be made. And the other is a sort of unhinged, almost hedonism of we can do anything we want. It doesn't matter because the situation that we like is going to remain.